Hello, my name is Jessica Lee, and this is my presentation on Carl Rogers, The History and Philosophy of Learning. The purpose of this presentation is to provide the historical context and development of Carl Rogers' theory of learning and how this might be applied to a classroom setting. We're going to start with the historical context. We're going to describe how Carl Rogers adopted a client-centered approach, how Carl Rogers viewed learning in a therapeutic setting, how he developed his theory of learning, how he applied this theory to a school setting, the opposition that he faced, and finally, considerations for application. Carl Rogers graduated with a doctorate in psychology in 1931, and at that time, Freudian psychotherapy was the predominant method of therapy. This was founded on the belief that behavior is driven by childhood experiences and unconscious thoughts and feelings. Individuals who received therapy at the time were referred to as sick patients in need of care. Informed by his own experience, Otto Rank, Abraham Maslow, and others, Rogers rejected the Freudian approach to psychotherapy and instead created a client-centered approach known as humanistic psychology. Within this approach, individuals were not viewed as sick patients driven by their past experience and subconscious, but as clients capable of understanding their own hurt and the means to resolve that hurt to meet their fullest potential. Rogers described this process as learning. In a therapeutic setting, he said that there were 5 key elements to learning. The first was exploration of a meaningful problem, meaning something that was of value to the client. The second was authenticity, meaning that the therapist arrived at the session as their authentic self. They weren't playing a role, they had their thoughts, their feelings, and emotions as they did in any other setting. The next element was unconditional positive regard or acceptance. This means that regardless of the feelings that the client expressed, maybe bad or good, that they were accepted as they were. Finally, empathy. This meaning that Rogers did his best to view problems in the client's shoes as they were perceiving them, while also maintaining control of his own emotions. And then finally, an awareness of these key elements on the part of the client or patient, meaning that they weren't just things that Carl Rogers himself was trying to present, but that they were understood on the other end by the client. It was through his practice and through reflecting on his own practice that Rogers developed his theory of learning. He described significant learning as learning that is meaningful to the individual, self-directed, and results in a change of behavior, attitude, or action with the goal of self-actualization. Rogers tested this theory of learning, which became known as humanistic education, across the grade levels in public schools in California. Key aspects of humanistic education included authentic problems solved through self-directed, hands-on exploration. Teachers acting as resource gatherers and facilitators, creating a collaborative environment of authenticity, acceptance, and empathy. Collaboration amongst students and staff. Creative expression and self-evaluation, meaning that students were encouraged to use art and drama to present what they've learned, and students were the key evaluators of their work rather than the teacher. And development of the whole child, both feeling and intellect. Rogers' greatest opponent of thought was B.F. Skinner, who believed that choice, which Rogers so greatly valued, was an illusion, and that behavior was merely a response to positive and negative stimuli. Skinner proposed mechanizing, rather than humanizing, the educational system. Now that our presentation has come to a close, reflecting on Rogers' theory of learning and his application of it, how might you apply his methods or maybe reject his methods? There are 3 key considerations when reviewing Rogers' school of thought. The first is to know your own limits and your capacity to facilitate student-led learning. Rogers described this himself when talking about teachers trying to take on his methods and apply them, and he found that educators who did not have the capacity to implement a student-led learning environment eventually found failure. So Rogers described how you can gradually incorporate this method or in a limited capacity incorporate this method and consider how you can give students voice and choice over what they're learning. The second key factor is considering how you can expand the worldview of your students. In any educational theory or philosophy that's driven by choice and student-centered belief systems, you're going to find self-absorption or or a focus on the individual. And what we want is our students to also be aware of the thoughts and the needs and the feelings of those around them and of the learning and knowledge that they might not naturally be inclined to learn. The third and final thing is that regardless of how much you want to adopt his theory or how much you want to apply student-led learning into your own practice, you can always choose to be authentic with your students, show them unconditional positive regard and empathy. Thank you for joining me for this presentation of Carl Rogers and his theory of learning.